Welcome back. Thanks for listening to Rule Number 3, the podcast committed to an asshole-free workplace. I'm your host, Eric Harkins, author of Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck. And I'm excited to relaunch the podcast with Rule Number 3. And our guest today, Wayne Brown. If you don't know Wayne, you are in for a treat. We have so much ground to cover. International executive. One of the things that you talk about, Wayne, is you've had 45 years of enjoying all levels of corporate and entrepreneurial life. And your story is pretty incredible. So you are from Australia originally. You've spent time in Australia, New Zealand, China, now Hong Kong specifically, London and Europe. And 45 years of leadership lessons at a global level. We will have no shortage of topics to talk about, but welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Eric, great to connect again. We've connected a few times over the past couple of years, so it's really a pleasure to be able to come back on the show. And congratulations on the relaunch.
Yeah, well, thank you. We've had some fun conversations with different leaders, and really, it's about finding people that have the same passion I have, as I know you do, around creating workplaces that people want to be a part of, making sure you have the right leadership, and helping leaders, become the types of leaders that people want to work with and for. A little bit more about your background, and I might have you talk a little bit about it for people that don't know you. So currently, as a lot of you know, I'm recording the podcast in Minneapolis area, Minnesota, in the United States. And Wayne is in Hong Kong, so he is having his second cup of morning coffee as I'm getting ready for dinner when we're done. But appreciate you taking the time. Wayne is a best-selling author, a speaker, award-winning coach, the author of 2 books, and want to get into that. Want to give you the accolade that you deserve. Last year, you were named the Executive Coach of the Year by CEO Today magazine. That must have been a pretty cool honor. Tell us a little bit about how you found out about it, and what an awesome accomplishment. It's a pretty big award. So,
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I was notified by the magazine. It's They don't give you too much detail, unfortunately. I inquired, who nominated me, where did the votes come from, type of thing. But they're mum about that, and so you don't get to learn too much about it.
Yeah.
As I dug into it myself, there's a magazine that they produce once a year, which has got all the people that have been awarded some title. And there's a big list, by the way. So I think in Hong Kong there was 4 of us that were given this accolade. And look, it's great. I don't have that ambition, by the way, to set out to get awards for doing what I do, because I'm passionate about what I do. Just as you are. And but it's always nice to get the acknowledgement, to get the recognition, and so look, to receive it.
Yeah.
Not going to give.
Well,
I have a trophy sitting on the mantelpiece. So.
Right. Well, and I talked to a lot of people. My background was a lot of retail, so I moved all within the United States, but moved a few times, lived in 5 different states. And so, it's not uncommon for me to talk to leaders that moved, but I think you probably win the award, because one of the stats that I think is so interesting is you've lived and worked on 4 continents, and you've worked with people from over 100 countries. And I had to Google how many countries there were, because I couldn't remember. 192 countries in the world. You've worked with people at over half of them. So one of the things I'm excited to talk about is, hey, with all this international experience, what are the similarities? What are the differences? And as you and I've talked about, one of the things I am passionate about is just sort of helping people understand that, listen, great leaders are great leaders and bad leaders are bad leaders. And, I'll let you just kind of speak to that. But in some of our previous conversations, whether you're in, whatever one of your 100 countries you're interacting with people from, I think that's a generally true comment, correct? I mean, hey, there's great leaders and there's bad leaders, and it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter where you work. We kind of are who we are.
And that's the sad reality, I have to say, is my experience.
Yeah.
You mentioned a number of the countries where I've worked and lived. You missed India, Middle East, uh, Germany. You said Europe,
Yeah.
Germany in particular. Look, my experience is that we're all human beings,
Yeah.
and we're pretty much tarred with a similar brush. Our experiences help shape who we end up being,
Yeah.
and when we get to this adult level, that those experiences, our beliefs, our values, and all that is formed. And unfortunately, some people form that wrong approach in life,
Yeah.
and they bring it to the workplace.
Right.
And your book beautifully illustrates that in the sense that there are assholes in the world that are out there leading business,
Right.
and that's it's a sad reality. And
Yeah.
in my experience, it's across the world. It's not something that America has claim to.
We don't
It's
own the
something
marketplace on assholes. That's good to know.
you don't own the marketplace. I'm
Yeah.
happy to tell you. They exist in Australia, they exist in Europe, they exist in India, they exist in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Is my experience of it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the questions, and we could spend the entire episode 1 and episode 2 talking about this, but this is a loaded question to start with. But I'm kind of fascinated by this topic of it's 2023. You've been doing this for 45 years across continents and countries, and we're still talking about it, right? And I recently spoke, and a woman came up to me afterwards, and she said, "You know what I like about the title of your book?" And I said, "Oh, what?" She said, "Well, it seems like you could have written it 30 years ago, and you could probably write it in 30 years." And I guess for the book, that's a good thing, but it kind of makes me sad. Like, will we ever stop talking about assholes in the workplace? And that is a loaded question, but I'm going to throw it at you and let you respond.
Um, well, I guess the short answer would be it's unlikely.
Yeah.
Right? I don't see, unless the robots come over and AI takes over entirely and we get rid of humans, who knows?
Yeah.
down
Right.
to then it's down to the coding in the robot, I guess. But look,
Right.
at the end of the day, what I can say, my observation is I can see a difference in the younger generations.
Yeah.
So if we look at the 20th century leadership,
Yeah.
it was a different period. And for sure, a lot of leaders coming out of that period would fit that category. They could wear that brand very
Yeah.
nicely.
Yeah.
Um, I'm hopeful, and I see some indication that the younger generation has the opportunity to make that difference.
Yeah.
Whether that will play out, I don't
Right.
know.
Yeah.
I see
Well,
some potential.
well, you were recently on a podcast. I'm glad you brought it up. Transitioning to 21st century leaders, and you talked a little bit about that. So I'd love to expand on it. One of the things you talk about is the dark triad of
Mm.
20th century leaders, and I'd love to have you talk about what that means to you, and in all of your coaching, how you've kind of come up with this dark triad.
Yeah. Well, I would love to lay claim to it, but it's actually a term in psychology.
Yeah.
Um, so the dark triad, it goes by a number of names, but essentially it's talking about three particular characteristics. It's talking about narcissists, Machiavellianists, and psychopaths. And unfortunately, they all exist in the leadership. They exist outside of leadership, of course,
Yeah.
but they exist as well in leadership.
Yep.
And I know in your book you talk about what could be a number of dark triads.
Yeah.
So the characteristics of these people show up everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'm sure as your listeners are listening, they could easily recall experiences where they've encountered
Yeah.
a narcissistic type of leader.
For sure.
Um, what's really surprising and what I love diving into with in different discussions is quite often the company is well aware that these leaders exist.
Yeah.
And the reason that they don't act, and you talk about
Right.
people change their colors, they don't change their spots. An arsehole's going to be an arsehole for life.
Right.
The reason the company is reluctant to do anything about them is quite often they're successful
Yeah.
in terms of results.
Yeah.
Not successful in management and not successful in any way, shape, or form from a humanistic point of view.
Right.
Quite often they produce the results.
Yeah.
And the company's reluctant to change the process and the pattern for
Yeah.
fear of what that might be,
Yeah.
which is a really sad indictment on companies, but it tends to be a reality.
It is, and not to stereotype, but in my experiences, the sales organization kind of is a leader in that category of, well, yeah, we know
Mm.
this guy's an asshole, but he's our top salesperson. You want us to get rid of our top salesperson? And I always say, yeah, I do. And it's easier said than done, to your point. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, and
And
I'm
unfortunately,
oh yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, unfortunately, um, the leaders create this environment where, we have Amy Edmondson talks about psychological safety.
Yeah.
Well, psychological safety doesn't exist in those environments, and
Right.
it never will. And to
Right.
your point, if we don't get rid of those bad eggs or bad apples in the basket,
Right.
then nothing changes. And
Yeah.
it only goes, it spirals, in fact.
Yeah.
One bad apple leads to a whole bunch. So,
Right. Right. Well, and I talk about, that's why I think things like values fall short for most companies, because the words are on the wall and the employees are looking at them every day, but then they see this leader that doesn't live any of them and they say, well, wait a second, what are we doing here? So, but one of the things that I think is a really interesting concept that we both talk about in our coaching and that I want to get into with you is I think somebody might have asked you on this podcast, or maybe you brought it up, but it was, what's one big difference between a 20th century leader and a 21st century leader? And the answer was vulnerability. And I think it's such an interesting topic, that leaders who are vulnerable or show up with that genuine and authentic self. So I'd love to have you kind of expand on what you've seen, and that difference. You talked about the younger generation of leaders being more vulnerable, which is probably a good thing. So,
yeah, look, I believe it is. And of course, I can't lay claim to talking about vulnerable leaders. You have
yeah,
people like Renee
sure.
Breen.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
my reason for talking about it is because in a lot of the programs we deliver, um, particularly to first-time leaders and young leaders, there's this expectation almost that they wake up one morning and they have this new title has somehow branded them as a leader, as a
Yeah,
manager.
right.
It's like they've overnight magically had the big S painted on their chest
Right.
and they become superhuman. And yesterday they were John Smith. Today they're
Yeah,
the world's savior. And they believe they suddenly have all the answers to the world's problems, to the food hunger.
right.
Everything is now laid at their feet, and their role in life is to provide all the answers. Now, that
Yeah,
was very stereotypical of what happened in the 20th century leadership
sure.
models.
Yeah,
As leaders, there was some unspoken expectation almost that, and I'm stereotypical uh, branding here. I mean, it's of course you always have outliers, but generalizing,
right. Right.
um, I would say there was an unspoken expectation that you're the leader, go and solve the issue,
Yeah,
right? And I would then go away and I would come up with my solutions and I would try and impose that upon the team. And right or wrong, that's how we would do it.
right.
That's we live with the outcome. So what needs to happen for the 20th century leader that's still stuck in that 20th century, operating in the 21st century,
Yeah,
is they need to be able to let go of the mantra. They need to be able to say, you know what, in today's complexity, in this rate of rapid change with technology, with
yeah,
so much going on, it's impossible, absolutely impossible for any one individual hold the answers to all the issues and the problems they're going to be.
Right.
And the only way that they can deal with that is to become more vulnerable, to let go of that ego
Yeah.
and say, you know, I don't have all those answers.
Right.
And I don't even know what all the problems are.
Yeah.
And the only way we're going to get through this is as a leader, if I admit to that and I become open and transparent and I bring my team or I bring other people in to help work on these challenges that we face.
Yeah.
And for the 20th century leader, that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
In many cases.
Yeah.
Now, what your point about the younger generation, what I love about the younger generation is if, and God willing, their mentors are not 20th century leaders.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they have the opportunity to look at the world as it is today,
Yeah.
they have the opportunity to see it differently and
Yeah.
to come into a business where they already are collaborating as a standard.
Yeah.
And therefore they're more open and willing to let go of that title.
Right.
So,
Well,
solo.
yeah. Well, we're going to talk about your book here in a minute, but along those lines, I think, I usually joke and say, you know who really likes leaders that make all the decisions, have all the answers, and never show any vulnerability? Poor performers, because they don't have to do anything because the leader's doing it. But you know who gets disengaged when that happens is your high performers who are saying, listen, what do you need me for if you're just going to make all the decisions? And I know you agree with that, but I'd love to, get any thoughts or, from your coaching and lessons learned of, that difference between the leader that has that, vulnerability to say, listen, team, I don't know the answer. And the results that probably are greatly improved by having that team dynamic versus showing up being the smartest person in the room all the time.
I'm guilty as charged. I have to admit, in my career, I've been that. I've been the guy that thought that I had all the answers, and I would be very outspoken and share those answers with me and get annoyed when people didn't always agree. So I've been on both sides. So I need to state that. I've just come out of a 3-day challenge. So we've just completed a 3-day challenge.
I want to hear more about that for sure. So,
yeah, but one of the great things that I love in playing the role of the facilitator is, even though facilitators need to have a grounding or a solid base understanding of what they're talking about, the topic they're introducing. What I've learned over the years is the audience, the participants, don't necessarily expect that you have all of the understanding.
Sure.
And if you give people the opportunity to contribute, if you ask the questions, what else could there be that I'm not aware of that is worth discussing in this room at this moment? It blows me away. I'm always astounded by, I call it the collective genius, the collective voice that sits within the group. Given the opportunity, it just blows my mind. It's fantastic, right? And these people don't have to be professors. They don't have to be 45-year veterans like me.
Right.
I learn just as much from my 8-year-old daughter as I do from some people at work and
absolutely
college professors that I've worked with. So you never know where the good advice is going to come from if you don't get the opportunity to surface.
Right. Well, a little bit later, we're going to get into sort of your wisdom of, the 10 learnings from your 45 years. And, one of them, and we'll come back to it, is that, continuous learning, lifelong learning, and, embracing that versus, I don't know what the opposite is, frustrated by or whatever. So we'll come back to that. But I think it's important that as we're talking about this, vulnerability, the 21st century leader needs to be different than the 20th century leader. I think it's important to remind people that doesn't mean you can't have tough conversations. That doesn't mean you can't fire people. that doesn't mean you can't tell somebody that they're not getting the job done and it's time to move on. And I think somewhere that gets lost a little, that you're telling me, I can't be the bully like, leaders in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. Well, yeah, you don't want to be a bully, but you can still be tough on crime. You don't have to let people underperform.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, absolutely. This is one of the challenges that I think the new breed of leaders probably have to face is there is that balancing act.
Yeah.
And it's not that everyone's got to be happy and smiling every single day. That's not really what we're suggesting.
Yeah.
In reality, if you don't keep that balance, it tends to go downhill anyway,
Yeah.
because the high performers, and I think you talk about in your book, the high performers become disengaged when they feel that their work environment's not fair, not
Right.
just.
Right.
And you have the underperformers who are sitting in the team. You may want to give them the opportunity. You may want to question,
Yeah.
is there something I'm doing as a leader that's not really enabling them?
Right.
But once you identify that this performer is just not a performer that's going to work in your team, you
Right.
have to cut forward.
Yeah.
And you do it in a right way. You do it in an amicable way.
Right.
But if you don't do it,
Right.
you look at the consequences, which is typically poor performance by the whole group,
Right.
because people don't gravitate upwards in this case, they gravitate down
Right.
towards that
Yeah.
performer.
They model that behavior because it's acceptable or whatever, whatever that might be. And yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
agree. So let's talk about how you got to where you are. So this incredible journey, all these countries, 45 years, you started, and I want to make sure I get this right. So, born in Australia, but started with Cone Elevators. You were with Schindler Lifts. You were with TK Elevator for almost 2 decades, across Europe and China, and again, all these different countries. But then you went on to establish 9 businesses, and you founded 2 companies. So, the elevator industry, did you just kind of back into it? Was that a dream of yours? Did you know somebody that gave you your first job? Because you stayed in that kind of industry for a good portion of your career, different companies, but sort of elevator industry, if I'm correct.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't start my career in the elevator industry. I started in the electrical engineering, power supply industry.
Okay.
Way back in 1978. So
All right.
many of your listeners probably not born at that stage.
There's probably a few that weren't, but there's some of us that were. So
I didn't go to university at that point. Right? So I'm an early adopter in terms of working, but a late bloomer in terms of academia.
yeah.
So for the first, and my early career was really centered around my sporting life.
Okay.
So I was, I know you don't have it in America much, but I was a rugby league
Yeah.
player for, well, since I could almost crawl,
Yeah.
up until the point where I realized that it's time now to get serious about my career.
Yeah.
Which is 27, 28.
Right.
And so my life focused around sport. My parents were great tennis players. My father was a coach for one of the Davis Cup players.
Hmm.
I did a lot of swimming. I was a lifesaver at one stage. And this is all parallel to working.
Yeah.
So I played cricket, another game that you Americans haven't taken to so much.
No.
But so yeah, look, I was heavily involved in sport, and I loved it. Very typical young male growing up with cars, and great lifestyle on the beach. So that was sort of my interest lay at that time. But it was around about 27, 28. I had this, I don't know, call it an epiphany if you want. But
Yeah.
there was some some shift in my thinking, and I thought, well, I kind of like what I see with a couple of people, and they're working in the office. They were white collar. I
Yeah.
was blue collar at the stage, working on the tools. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed what I did. Um, but I decided that, I'd like to move into leadership more so and start to develop that career.
Yeah.
But as I said, I didn't go to university, so I did an apprenticeship when I started working, 4-year apprenticeship. So I was an electrical fitter mechanic
Mm.
in the early stages, and that led me into engineering, etc. Right.
Yeah.
So um,
Awesome.
at that point, I
Yeah.
sort of um, became obsessed with learning,
Yeah.
and uh, I've been asked the question a few times, and I really couldn't say concretely what that trigger was.
Yeah.
But when it happened, I remember it happened and it hasn't stopped. So I
Yeah.
sort of got involved, and like even today, you can see I'm wearing the Duke shirt, joking
Yeah.
about it. But even today, um, every year I will undertake some short courses in two of the top 10 leading universities around the world. I do like
That's great.
3-month course or something,
Yeah.
um, because I'm passionate. I'm just, whatever reason, I'm so passionate about continuous learning. Be
Yeah.
able to talk about that. So look, that one thing led to another. I moved into leadership. That gave me the opportunity um, to move around,
Yeah.
and probably the reason that I was able to move around because I was a naturally curious person,
Yeah.
and so I looked for opportunities to learn and grow and develop my career, which led me to moving around different locations. So I started in
Yeah.
Australia, spent 6 years in New Zealand.
Mm.
As you said, I'm Hong Kong,
Yeah.
Shanghai, and China. Um, I've worked in and lived in Germany. I've worked and lived in India. I've
Yeah.
worked all over Asia. I've worked in America, particularly in Georgia, Atlanta.
Yeah.
I've worked in across Europe. So there's many
Yeah.
locations, and that's given me the opportunity, of course,
Yeah.
to work with huge number of really intellectually
Yeah.
fascinating.
Right.
And
Well,
yeah, look, it's been a wonderful job, a wonderful career, and no regrets.
yeah,
Absolutely.
no, incredible, amazing. I'm honored to have you on with all of these experiences, and one of the things that came out of that was one of two books that you've both written and co-authored. So, Solo Executives, check it out if you haven't. Released in 2021, and it's Solo Executives: 5 Transformational Strategies for Leaders Overcoming Isolation, Anxiety, and Fatigue in Career Transition. So love the subtitle. And I'd like to get into the 5 that you kind of talk about, and they're just really easy takeaways, simple messages. So if you don't mind, I want to jump right into it. Certainly a
Sure.
plug for your book, so you can expand on that too. But you talk about these 5 strategies, and one of the things I appreciate, and you were complimentary of my book, and I appreciate that it's let's not overcomplicate it, right? And that's what I love about your 5 is none of these are like, oh my god, you can't do any of them. They're pretty simple concepts. And the first one is find a mentor. Pretty straightforward. Find a mentor. I don't know if you want to add any color to that, but I would imagine you've learned over your 45 years the value of having that person that you can call when you need to get some coaching.
Look, absolutely. I use a phrase personal board of directors
Yeah.
in my coaching, and this is something that for all young leaders, I really encourage everybody to do.
Yeah.
Today, you can't do it yourself anyway.
Right.
Why not do it together with people that you trust, that you
Yeah.
feel confident working with, that you don't have to agree with everything they say,
Yeah.
right? It's
Right.
not about all of a sudden you're going to be dictated to, and now it's just like I'm back at home with my parents, and this is what
Right.
I've got to do.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about. what we're talking about is the opportunity to gain additional perspectives on the things that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And in my life, I've typically had 4 to 5 mentors and coaches,
Yeah.
maybe advisors at different stages, that I draw on constantly.
It's
Now
great.
I may be one end of the spectrum, and I'm not suggesting you dive that deep, but
Sure.
um, the real value of having a mentor, and it's so valuable for me. I have 2 of my 5. One is mentoring, one is coaching. So
Yeah.
for me, this is
Yeah.
so foundational to helping transform as a leader.
Yeah.
That the 2 in there.
Yeah.
So look, in my own regard, I've been mentoring for more than 30 years.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't start out to be a mentor. I sort of stumbled into being a mentor, but
Sure.
um, it has a dual purpose. You
Yeah.
develop at the same time as helping the other people.
Right.
And just try it.
Yeah.
If you don't like
Yeah.
it, stop
Right.
doing it.
Right. And that's pretty good advice for anything, right? Hey, try it. If you don't like it, you don't have to keep doing it. But so find a mentor, number one. Number two, solicit feedback. I love that in its simplicity. And I don't know that all of us do it enough. And I think I'm probably guilty of that at times. But tell us what that means to you, solicit feedback.
If there was one secret ingredient to becoming more successful as a leader,
Yeah.
this would be it for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my experiences, leaders in general, we're not good at this.
Yeah.
We still, and this is this vulnerability issue.
Yeah.
Um, we're reluctant to put ourselves out there
Right.
and hear what others really think about us,
Yeah.
or to get feedback of most, and probably that comes out of the way you're brought up. So I'm generalizing in all of these statements, of course. It's going
Sure.
to be exceptional.
Right.
But if leaders can embody this one takeaway, I would really say feedback is something that's got the potential to change your.
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. Number three on the 5, strengthen collaboration.
So you start to see how all these stack.
Yeah, absolutely.
So mentoring, and then we're talking about feedback. Well, collaboration it's a given in today's business world.
Yeah.
When I was coming through my early part of the career, this was something that was really foreign to me. Never heard that word even.
Right.
And it's really only in the last couple of decades where I start to see evidence of it. Now, today, of course, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Whether it's collaboration with colleagues in the same team, whether it's collaboration with other departments, whether it's companies collaborating, whether it's different industries, whether you're mixing. So, for instance, give you an example, one of the projects I worked on maybe half a dozen years ago now, we worked on with Microsoft with their HoloLens AR headset.
Hmm.
So, that was a whole different dynamic to anything that I'd ever experienced before. I had the opportunity to go up to Redmond and sit in the office in the Seattle offices with the Microsoft team. Fantastic campus,
Very cool.
and that was a whole different environment that gave me a different perspective on what might have been possible looking at it through a different lens.
Yeah.
And that's one of the beauties that I see with collaboration, as it is with mentoring, coaching, and getting feedback. It is you see things from a different perspective. Now, why collaboration is so popular is because if you're a business and you're trying to do everything yourself, then you're going to limit your ability to grow.
Sure.
Collaboration, scaling, these things give you the opportunity to jumpstart or to grow at pace. And in today's world, change is just a constant. So
Right.
we have to be changing. And it's much easier to do it when you collaborate with others
Sure.
than it is to try yourself. So,
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. I mean, these do stack on each other. The fourth one, we talked about it a little bit earlier. Commit to a lifetime of continuous learning. Just a great, easy message, and one that hopefully people embrace, right?
well, it's no longer optional, I have to say.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
throw that out there.
Yeah.
In today's world, when I did my apprenticeship back in 1978, the skills that I learned would last me, the estimate was about 30 years.
Hmm.
So those skills carried me through a large portion of my career.
Yeah.
The estimate today is the skills you learn today may have a shelf life of 3 years tops.
Hmm.
So you don't have that option anymore. You
Yeah.
must become lifelong learner. Continuous learning.
Yeah.
The one beef I have is that I don't believe the university academia world has been able to keep pace with the change of the requirements within the business world.
Yeah.
And when I look at master's degrees, even bachelor degrees, and I look at these long duration programs, I can see there's an effort to compress them and make
Yeah.
them shorter. But if I was advising anyone that I coach, my advice is if you're committing to more than 1 year,
Yeah.
better be really confident.
Yeah.
It's no longer that you can just do it ad hoc because you like that topic and you think that's the direction you want to go. The
Sure.
world is changing.
Yeah.
For me, shorter is better. And even when we look at people that are being hired today, there's less emphasis now on whether you have a degree
Yeah.
to what are the things that carry as your skill set
Yeah.
that you've developed in your experience.
Yep.
Right. So there is that transition.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Absolutely. Yeah.
long
No.
answer to you.
Great answer, and hopefully, this is getting people excited to check out your book. We'll plug it again here, but the last one, the fifth one, is identify the right coach. And obviously, this is what you do very well for a living at a very high level, and at different stages throughout your career. I assume you reflect back and say, "Wow, fortunately, I had that coach at that stage to really help me, get to where I am today."
Yeah, and the reason that I wrote it with that title, Identify the Right Coach, is because not every coach is right for every individual. So really you need to do your due diligence. You need to find the person that you are comfortable with. I mean, and the one takeaway I would give with people is it's possible to have a short-term outcome through coaching, but I'm yet to find that it's sustainable.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so therefore I would question people that come into a coaching environment and say, I just want someone to coach me for the next three months because I've got this challenge. I want to get through this challenge. Now that's possible,
Yeah.
but it's really looking short term.
Yeah.
And my own practice, I won't coach people under 6 months because I believe it takes time for
Yeah.
change to evolve
Yeah.
and to be embedded. And
Right.
6 months shortest, but on average it's
Yeah. Awesome.
so you're going to partner with somebody for 12 months. You want to make sure they're the right person.
Right.
So that's
Yep. Yeah. Well, and another thing people can do for coaching is to check out your book. So another plug for it, Solo Executives, 5 Transformational Strategies for Leaders Overcoming Isolation, Anxiety, and Fatigue in Career Transition. But you also, in collaboration with some other authors, released Transforming Your Life, which is 20 incredible stories showing the strength of the human spirit. Tell us a little bit about what people can expect in that book.
Yeah, so this is a cohort of coaches that have come together. How we came together, it's a bit of a backstory, but we all embarked on the same program.
Yeah.
And the group running the program provide this opportunity to release them. And this is volume 6 of
Okay.
that title.
Okay.
Transforming
Okay.
life. Life has been around for, I think this is sixth year.
Hmm.
They do one a year. Um, the series has been incredibly well received, and it's typically true life stories
Yeah.
for the individual about one element, one part of that journey in their career.
Yeah.
So in my case, it's talking about what I'm doing as coaching and the decision process
Yeah.
to go into the coaching and to step away from the corporate world. So you mentioned earlier about 9 businesses, 2 companies. So I've been, I've always operated in parallel. I've had a dual existence. So I've worked in the corporate world 45 years, but I've also been very entrepreneurial and running my own businesses, companies for about 40 of those years. So I've
Yeah.
had this parallel.
Yeah.
And stepping away from the corporate world entirely now, which I did September last year,
Yep.
and now totally focused on my company, um, is essentially what I'm talking about in the book and
Yeah.
decision process, why I did it and when I did it,
Yeah.
and the challenges that I faced, hopefully the benefits that come out.
Yeah. So it always goes so fast, but I think that's a perfect place to kind of wrap up episode 1, and we'll continue on that topic in episode 2. But Wayne Brown, CEO of um, several businesses that you founded, but Skills for Executives Today. You also run the ET project with Wayne Brown. And for people who may not know you, what's the best way for people to reach you or to find you or to reach out if they're looking for coaching?
Yeah. So you can go to LinkedIn. It's probably
Yeah.
the easiest. So LinkedIn, if you
Yeah.
search Wayne Brown, probably find there's a number. So my suffix is a coach. So when you type in Wayne Brown, just put the coach and
Yeah.
you'll find me.
Awesome.
That's probably the easiest.
Yep.
You can connect with me via email if you like, Wayne
Yep.
at Skills for Executives. The 4 is the number 4,
Yep.
not word
And
4,
and
all one word.
we'll make sure people know how to reach out as we post this as well. But thank you for joining me for part 1 of a 2-part discussion that we're going to pick up here at another time. Wayne Brown, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and what an incredible journey you've had, and can't wait to continue the discussion in episode 2.
Eric, always love connecting with you, my friend, and been a pleasure. I look
Yeah.
forward to coming back on and continuing. So all the best with the show, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm enjoying it so far.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it's great to have guests like you on. And hey, we're going to keep the conversation going here in just a little bit. So thanks, Wayne.
Yeah. For your listeners, by the way, Eric,
Yeah.
I'm going to try and get a second book out of you, by the way. So I'm keen to see what's on the horizon for you with books. So we'll come back to that topic.
We'll come back to that too. So that sounds good. Awesome. Well, hey, again, thank you everyone for tuning in to Rule Number 3, the podcast committed to an asshole-free workplace. And join us for episode 2 with Wayne Brown. And thanks for listening.